I first started using manual on my camera, it was very confusing. After all, I was only using auto before that, and I didn't know how to change any of the options. To help clear some of the confusion that goes on when switching to manual on your camera, I'm going to be talking about the 3 main things of your camera on manual mode. Now, these settings can be changed on some modes, on some auto modes, but manual is where you can change all of them. Now, most of you probably already know all these settings. This is for the people that were like me when I started using manual mode and were very confused. So the first setting that we're going to be talking about is Aperture. Aperture? Yeah. We're going to be talking about Aperture. Now, Aperture is a space through which light passes an optical or photographic instrument. Now, in photography, this relates to the hole that light passes through to be exposed onto the camera. Now, let's say in scenarios such as low light photography, we want as much light as we can get into the camera, hence the name low light photography. To let more light into our camera, we need that hole to be wider. Now, to make that hole wider, we simply turn down the aperture. But this may vary on what lens you're using. Some lenses can't go down to a lower number like other lenses, such as my nifty 50. This can only go down to an f-stop of 2.8. F-stops are the lowest that the aperture can go. To sum up aperture, it's what makes your photos brighter and introduces more background blur without bringing in any noise. Now, speaking of noise, let's talk about ISO, or ISO? However you want to say it. Now, ISO can be tricky, but it can help a ton with your photos. ISO's main purpose is to brighten up your image, similar to aperture, but when turning up the ISO, it brings in more noise. Now, this varies on what type of camera that you're using. For my old camera, which is the Rebel T3i from Canon, going above 1000 ISO brings in a ton of noise into my image. Now, I don't want that because I want crispier images. So I usually stick to 200 to 600 range of ISO. So I recommend messing around with ISO and seeing what max level of ISO will brighten up your image without bringing in noise. Now remember, the less noise, the crispier the image. And the crispier the image, the better the image. Another way to have a better and crispier image is having the right shutter speed, which brings us to our third subject, your shutter speed. Shutter speed is how long your camera's shutter is going to stay open. Now, to explain the shutter, if you don't already know, the shutter is one of the main parts in your camera. The shutter opens up to let light into the sensor. Now, the longer the shutter is open, the more light that is going to be in the sensor. Now, having a longer shutter speed will bring in more light, but when you shake your camera, or if there's any movement on the camera, your images will turn out blurry. Now, there is a form of photography called long exposure photography. I'll show some reference here. Basically, if you're shooting a waterfall and you do long exposure, it can make the water look more smooth and like there's motion to it. That's when you usually use a tripod, because using handheld will make your photos blurry because there's too much movement, even if it's a small amount. Now, for normal photography, a general rule of thumb is to set your shutter speed to match the focal length of your lens. Now, your focal range is usually on the side of your lens. So for my nifty 50, right here it says 50 mm or 50 millimeters. That means if I'm using my nifty 50, then I'll probably want to set my shutter speed to around 1/50th of a second. Obviously, you can play around with this and set the right shutter speed for you, but that's, like I said, a good general rule of thumb. Now, hopefully after watching this video, you have a better understanding of your camera and how manual works. And if it did help you, please consider subscribing. It would really help out my channel. I also stream every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. CST. Link is down below, along with other social medias. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, peace.